Can I ask you then, you've expressed reservations about whether you think the voice is a mechanism that will help or not help. Can we open that up a bit? How do you see it and why do you have reservations?
Where to start? Well, I guess the main one is it's premised on Indigenous people don't have a voice. And I'd like to know, in what sense do I not have a voice? Could someone describe that to me? They might say, well, you're okay, Anthony, but it's other disadvantaged, poorer ones who don't have a voice. Well, just like some poorer, disadvantaged, non-Indigenous people, do you say they don't have a voice as well? And when you look at those poorer ones who are often, not always, but often in remote communities, they do have people from those communities communicating with leaders and Indigenous experts and that sort of thing. So the whole premise of they lack a voice, that's not a good premise, it's wrong. The other matter with the voice is we haven't heard a clear plan for how it will solve the problems facing Indigenous people. We just hear, well, what we've done hasn't worked, and I agree with that. But then there's this bit of a jump of, well, it hasn't worked, so therefore this thing must work. Not necessarily. I mean, we should consider it with other options, but I haven't seen a good plan, a logical argument for how this mechanism will address the problems we know exist that are affecting far too many Indigenous people. And, we know the right areas, and Linda Burney has mentioned this, employment, education, and, many people have mentioned that, but we do have to close the gap. We do have to do some hard work and have some tough conversations, which many people don't like doing. And this whole thing of voice is a nice, neat little package. It's much more easy to comprehend and accept. And to me, to use a analogy, well, I don't know if analogy is the right word, but something similar, I've said before, we had the same expectations about, once we get an Indigenous person as the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, that will fix things, that will make things different. Well, we had Mr. White, and no disrespect to Mr. White, it didn't make any difference. Apparently he wasn't the right sort of Indigenous person in the eyes of some. So we got a new Indigenous person filling that portfolio. Again, we haven't seen any improvements. So again, I'm not disrespecting Burney or White, I'm just saying, the simple solution of just put an Indigenous person there in the portfolio and that'll fix the problems is nonsense. And I think having this new thing called The Voice, where it gives voice to Indigenous people, and they've already got voices, again, nice, neat little package, doesn't do the hard yards though.
Well, one key argument that people put up in support of The Voice is that it's been designed by Indigenous Australians. That's point one. And secondly, that it's overwhelmingly supported by them. According to this view, voting yes to it is a profound step towards reconciliation. I'd have to say we're not seeing much reconciliation at the moment. It's divided us down the middle as a country. But do you think it has been really designed by Indigenous people?
Well, when you say them, in that sense, you mentioned the word them, designed by them or something. And
well, I meant designed by, they say, by Indigenous
them,
people.
What does that word them mean? When we say them referring to Indigenous people, this group, whoever, I mean, it really should be some Indigenous people have supported and some have not. Where the split is, I don't know, but I certainly know there are many in both camps, but we shouldn't assume that this is what the Indigenous people want. We should be honest and say this is what some Indigenous people want. And what I find particularly interesting is we know that the Indigenous architects, who could be the Indigenous architects of The Voice, who we should call, I guess, the leaders of this movement, the Voice thing, they've done very, very well without The Voice and without treaties and that sort of thing. So I see a problem there. They should be using their voices to say, hey, to all those disadvantaged Indigenous people, if you want what I've got, you've got to do what I've got. You've got to walk the path that I've walked. And like I said earlier on, they've either been born into good circumstances or they've escaped bad circumstances and got themselves into good circumstances where they had access to safe environments, fresh food, vegetables, shelter, educational opportunities, those sorts of things. But, you know, to assume that this blanket statement that the Indigenous people want it, that's a bit misleading.